Back in the autumn lockdowns of 2020, when everything seemed to be shutting down again, I had a stroke of real good fortune. A friend of mine alerted me to an item for sale at auction, an old reel of film whose provenance was unknown and whose contents were uncertain. This mysterious film then went on to become my obsession, and that obsession became a book. It actually took me some time to determine which year the film was from. Though it was titled Stage 4, coming in at a monstrous 412 kilometres across Brittany, which was quite a normal distance for the age, it wasn't immediately clear which edition of the race it was. In the aftermath of the Great War from 1919 to 1924, the Tour de France followed an identical route. A great deal of sleuthing led me eventually to conclude that it was from Stage 4 of the 1923 Tour de France. Back then, in the post-war era, the race was 15 stages long and followed a route which hugged the very perimeters of the nation, starting and finishing in Paris, but taking in the great mountain ranges of the Pyrenees and the Alps. Each stage was marked by a dozen checkpoints, where riders had to sign their name by the time of arrival. Every other day was a rest day, which was necessary since the stages started in the middle of the night and only finished towards dusk. Since the race had started in the dark, the first checkpoint at which it was possible to film was the port of Lorient, 154 kilometres into the stage. Pathé Cinema of France had only just started to send a cameraman out to the race. They would film highlights of 3 stages and then put the undeveloped film on a train back to Paris, where it would be processed, edited and distributed. A day or so later, in a dozen cinemas across the capital and beyond, the films would be shown before the main feature of the day. This revolutionised popular understanding of the Tour and made even greater stars of the riders. But it was only after weeks of staring intently at every frame of the film that I realised something startling. In the opening scene, with his back to the camera, is no less a figure than the founder of the Tour de France, Henri Desgranges. The tall man standing next to him, who walks over to send the riders on their way, could be none other than Bob Desmarais, or Big Bob as he was known. Newspaper reports from the day say that both he and Desgranges were present in Lorient and that Desmarais gave the order to start. But if you rewind, you can clearly see that he does so only after consulting a well-dressed man who is turned away from the camera. This is perhaps the only existing film of the founder of the Tour de France. Present too in the film, I later discovered after painstakingly comparing still images with the film, are both Henri and Francis Pélissier. Henri Pélissier would win the Tour that year, ending a 7-year winning streak by Belgian riders. The previous day, on a stage finishing in Brest, they had finished first and second, much like the Yates twins 100 years later. And the following year, they would be part of the infamous mutiny when they stormed off the race in protest at Desgranges' harsh regulations. The yellow jersey is in the film too. Ottavio Bottecchia would win the following edition, and again in 1925, before meeting a mysterious death in 1927, which remains unexplained to this day. Bottecchia was making his debut at the Tour, and would subsequently become the first Italian ever to win the Tour de France in 24. On Stage 4 in 1923, however, he would lose the jersey later on in the day after a series of punctures. But my principal point of focus became the largely unheralded Flandrian, Théophile Beekman, who was seen attacking into the Breton town of La Roche-Bernard. Not much is known about him, though I made it my mission to find out. What I could never quite ascertain, however, is quite why he decided to attack solo 165 kilometres from the end of the stage. Just as it would be nowadays, it was a mad move doomed to failure. We don't see the eventual stage winner, incidentally, since the projected film must have burnt on the bulb. Mostly, the reels were simply thrown away back then, and very few survive. Quite how this tiny fragment of film managed to dodge oblivion is far from clear, but it did. And I'll never forget the moment that I first saw these tiny, shadowy black and white figures move on my laptop screen after remaining hidden from view for a century.